On June 1st, 2011, a 55-year-old pyrotechnician is found dead inside his burned-down store.
We were convinced it was murder.
8 days later, the autopsy confirms that Jean Moritz was murdered.
In this case, there's a level of violence and determination in the methods used. They wanted this person to die.
Jean Moritz seemed to have been worried for some time.
He would still joke around, but not like he used to. I felt like he wasn't the same anymore. I got the impression he was worried.
The police soon suspect the ex-husband of Jean Moritz's girlfriend.
This man is extremely possessive, extremely jealous, and extremely violent.
Could the murder be connected to the victim's financial situation?
Jean was a bad payer. He paid in drips and dabs.
My father was more or less always in debt.
Could Jean Moritz have been killed by a rival pyrotechnician?
Some people in this industry are out to get all of the contracts. I think they could kill someone over it.
Today, the murderer's identity is still a mystery, but the investigators are continuing their efforts to crack the case. We're in Nord-Pas-de-Calais, in Louvroil, a small town with a population of 7,000, a few miles from Maubeuge. This is where Jean Moritz's charred body was found in the debris of his store in June 2011. After considering the possibility of an accidental death, the investigators soon discover a crime has taken place. Jean Moritz's family and friends are shocked and confused. Who would want to kill this 55-year-old pyrotechnician? The Lille Police Force's investigations have explored many leads, both personal and professional, but they haven't yet been able to identify the killer. We're looking back at a case that remains unsolved to this day. Let's go back to June 1st, 2011. Just like every morning at 9 a.m., Jean Moritz is getting ready to open his joke and fireworks store. It's been a year since he opened the store on the Aven Highway in Louvroil. Before starting work, Jean Moritz goes back up to his apartment located just above his business to wake up his 15-year-old son who is still asleep. Jesse, Jean Moritz's son, remembers that morning well.
He wakes me up and tells me he's opening the store. He's used to me not getting up. I barely reply to him. I remember he said that, and I must have answered, yeah, okay. And then I went back to sleep.
Jean Moritz goes back downstairs to open his store. He crosses paths with his neighbor, a garage owner. Tolga Tanraverdi says hello to the pyrotechnician.
He seemed tired. When I saw him, I said, "You're a bit tired, it shows." I even joked around a bit, saying things like, "You drank too much last night." But he didn't reply. He laughed, and that was it. It was a very ordinary morning like any other.
A few minutes later, Tolga Tanraverdi says goodbye to Jean Moritz and heads back to his garage to take his cars out and put them on display. It's around 20 to 10 when he joins his mechanics inside his workshop. Half an hour later, the garage owner notices the smell of smoke.
We smelled smoke in the parking lot, and we came running straight away. We thought a car was on fire, and just then, the mechanic noticed smoke coming from the neighbor's place next door.
After putting his cars in a safe place, Tolga Tanraverdi grabs a fire extinguisher and rushes to Jean Moritz's aid.
I noticed the door was locked. People were saying, "You mustn't force it. You'll cause a draft, and everything will suddenly go up in flames." So I didn't take the risk. I didn't dare go in. I thought, Mr. Moritz can't be in there.
Tolga Tanraverdi calls the fire brigade. Another of the pyrotechnician's neighbors rushes to the scene. He sees how big the fire is. Jean Moritz's store is engulfed in flames. Panic-stricken, the neighbor calls Giovanni Tonelli, who owns the property.
I called Jean to ask him what's going on, and I never got an answer. I just got his voicemail.
At 10:30, the fire brigade arrives at the scene. They open the locked door and enter the store. They immediately realize that stopping the fire from spreading is going to be a challenge.
When I got there, I saw firefighters. I saw the police cordoning off the street and everything. That's when I told the firefighters, there are people upstairs. I thought Jean was upstairs with his son.
The firefighters must urgently get Jean Moritz and his son out of the burning building. With the firefighters, Giovanni Tonelli rushes up the stairs to the apartment, which has a separate entrance from the store.
I'm sleeping, and then I hear the owner of the apartment shouting, "Where are you, Mr. Moritz?" He's looking for my dad. This wakes me up, and I open my eyes. I see smoke everywhere. That's when I realize that there's a problem. I get up at full tilt, I get dressed, I go downstairs, I see what's going on.
Sébastien Ducrot, reporter for Louvroil du Nord, was there that morning.
When the son arrives, he seems miles away. He doesn't seem to understand what's happening.
I'm somewhere else. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm watching, I'm waiting. I'm wondering where he is, that's all.
I asked Jesse, where's your dad? Jesse says, I don't know.
We tried to call him to find out where he was. We called his cell, it rang, but he didn't pick up. I thought maybe he's just going to buy cigarettes.
The news that a fire has broken out at the store spreads quickly around the Moritz family. Danny is one of the pyrotechnician's sons.
I heard there was a fire at his store, and he was nowhere to be found. Nobody knew where he was. So I called my brother Laurie to tell him what was going on.
Laurie will never forget his brother's call.
I get a phone call from my little brother Danny. He tells me Dad's store is on fire and they can't find Dad. But I have a bad feeling and I call my dad. The phone rings and rings and rings and he doesn't pick up.
The firefighters continue making their way inside the store. At the back of the storage room, in a small extension on the left, they find a man's body.
And that's when they told me there was a body, but they didn't say who it was. They didn't show me the body or anything, so I thought someone had died, but I didn't know who it was.
I never wondered who it was. For me, it was definitely my dad, because we couldn't find him. His car was there, so right away I thought it was my dad.
The body is soon identified by a man who introduces himself as a friend of the manager's. He identifies the body from a distinctive dental problem Jean Moritz had.
My father's front teeth were V-shaped. He would put wires in there and use them to strip the wires because he never had wire strippers with him. And he was always on launch sites. So he was always stripping wires with his teeth and getting copper in them.
Jean Moritz was 55 years old. He was the father of 8 children. The news of his death came as a shock to all of them.
My little brother called me in tears and told me, they found Dad in the flames, in the fire. He was crying when he told me. I think I dropped my phone and fell to my knees. That same day, I took the train to Lille, in the north of France, and I got there at around 11 p.m.
The police take Jesse in. The teenager is driven to the police station in Maubeuge to give a statement and wait for his family to come and get him. The fire at Jean Moritz's store has drawn many onlookers. The perimeter is secured as the store is heavily stocked with explosives for professional fireworks displays. By late morning, the fire is put out. The firefighters then authorize officers from the Maubert's police force to enter the warehouse and make their preliminary findings. The police noticed that the store entrance, where the counter and several shelves are, has been completely blackened by the smoke. The firefighters lead the investigators to the place where the body was found. Here, the fire has devastated the walls and ceiling. The firefighters think this was the room where the fire broke out. Lying against the left wall is the partially charred corpse. The dead man is lying flat on his back and surrounded by burned objects.
The first thing that stands out is that the body is very damaged. He has been exposed to heat. Part of the store is collapsed near where the body was found.
The police ask the firefighters to move the corpse. Under the body, they discover a large pool of blood. This is highly irregular, as fire expert Hidi Elkazin explains.
Of all the bodies we've moved, I've never seen a body with blood underneath. It evaporates. I mean, it's very rare.
Emmanuel Rigler is the Moritz family's attorney.
Where did that pool of blood come from? Some people think it might be because of the damage caused by the fire. He could have been hit by a block of concrete or stone. But blood around a burned body doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not logical.
At 12:30, a medical examiner from the Douai Court of Appeal arrives at the scene to collect the body. He determines the victim probably died from asphyxiation.
He doesn't go into detail because he doesn't know. And above all, it's the upper body that's burned. He says to hold off on a burial. Some things need to be checked, and we need to get to the bottom of this.
Jean Moritz's body is transported to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Lille for an autopsy. That's when the fire brigade alerts the police to a strange discovery. They found a burned human skull at the back of the warehouse, in a unit rented out to a funeral home business. Is this skull connected to Jean Moritz's death? Philippe Dubibier, one of the company's employees, is immediately questioned.
The firefighters apparently found a skull, and they gave it to the police. The police asked me, but it was an old skull that had nothing to do with the accident. A long time ago, one of my colleagues brought in a skull he had apparently found.
Forensic identification officers take samples from the area where the body was found. Tests will show whether an arson accelerant was used to start the fire.
We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have a methodology that enables us to interpret the ashes. If hydrocarbons have been used, normally there's some left over. So we take some samples all around the body. There's a protocol and a rationale.
I remember the firefighters told me an accelerant had likely been used because the fire spread so quickly in one place. Without an accelerant, the fire would have had time to spread to the right, to the left, to the front, to the back, with small flames and slowly.
Fragments of burnt tiles and fabric are immediately sent to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Lille. After taking the samples, the officers embark on their initial investigations.
At the time, there were unfortunately a lot of robberies happening at small businesses. So at first the possibility was considered of an armed robber breaking into Jean Moritz's store to try and steal cash.
But the cash register is still where it belongs. It hasn't been opened. However, some of the victims' belongings are missing.
The laptop had disappeared, which my dad used to keep in the store from open to close.
The store keys have also vanished.
The police told us keys could melt, so maybe that's why we didn't find them. He locked himself in the shop, even though he never locked the door. Never. The door was always unlocked.
Then again, it's hard to burn keys. It's very hard to melt keys.
The victim's cell phone doesn't turn up in the search either. The police can't explain why these objects are missing. But they don't believe this was an armed robbery gone wrong. They're leaning towards other theories.
The first idea everyone had was that it was an accident caused by handling the dangerous products in the store.
The possibility of suicide was also brought up, since the door to the store was locked.
The day after the fire, the journalist Sébastien Ducrot publishes an article which mentions both theories.
As soon as I saw that La Voix du Nord was calling it suicide or an accident, online and in the papers, I wanted to strangle the reporter.
The day after the article was published, some of Jean Moritz's sons came to see me because they completely disagreed with what was written in the article.
According to Jean Moritz's children, it's impossible for the fire to have been accidental.
Jean Moritz was a professional. He was extremely strict when it came to safety.
The victim's friends and family also reject the suicide theory.
It just isn't possible, if only for his zest for life, his children and his grandchildren, and his vigor. It's just impossible.
In less than 2 days, we were convinced it was murder.
At the start of the case, it really looked like an accident. However, the initial inspection of the scene of the fire was carried out as carefully as if it were a crime scene.
Of course, and that's for 2 reasons. The first relates to insurance. Jean Moritz rented the property. They were commercial premises. The initial findings would make it possible to establish the cause of the fire and who was at fault. And there's a second reason, which, from my perspective, is essential. It wasn't necessarily an accident. We know that some fires are started to cover up crimes, to get rid of evidence, for example. That's why the investigators carried out the inspection so thoroughly, and why an autopsy was arranged.
The second theory to explain Jean Moritz's death is suicide, but the police ruled out this lead very quickly.
Yes, that's right. Besides Jean Moritz's personality, a man described as cheerful and not at all suicidal, there's something which lets us rule out the suicide theory. The fact that his son Jesse was asleep above the store that burned down. I don't believe that this man who loved his children would have run this risk with his son.
When the firefighters entered the store, they noticed the front door was locked. The initial investigations failed to find Jean Moritz's keys on the premises. According to the investigators, these keys could well have been melted in the fire. Don't you find this explanation a bit strange?
Yes, it strikes me as highly unlikely. For the keys to have melted, there would have had to have been a very significant rise in temperature. The fire would have had to go on for much longer. And in that case, Jean Moritz's body would have been much more damaged than it was.
If the keys didn't melt, that means that they were taken, and so a third party was involved.
Yes, we can imagine that the person who started the fire stole the keys and locked the doors, either to prevent Jean Moritz from getting away or to delay the emergency service's arrival so that the flames had time to spread and cause the maximum damage.
This leads us to the third hypothesis, that of murder, a theory which has been favored since the start by Jean Moritz's children, who are convinced their father was killed.
And it's rather interesting, because when one of our loved ones dies, we don't necessarily jump to the conclusion of murder. In fact, it's the last thing on our minds. And here, the children are convinced before they even know about the preliminary findings. Perhaps they knew their father led a dangerous life or had enemies.
Despite Jean Moritz's family's suspicions, no one can say for sure at this stage of the investigation what caused the pyrotechnician's death. Only the autopsy on his body will be able to answer this question. On June 7, 2011, 6 days after the fire, the autopsy on Jean Moritz's body is carried out at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Lille. Dr. Bernard Marc has conducted many autopsies on burn victims.
The examination is carried out first by trying to extract as many elements as possible from the burned body, and then by cleaning it with a sponge to inspect the skin and start the external examination. You have to be very careful. Fire makes the body fragile.
During the exam, the medical examiner runs into several difficulties.
So the first difficulty simply involves looking for lesions that would be apparent on healthy skin, such as a hematoma, a bruise, but are hidden by the burns and the damage. There may also be small wounds or lesions, but on burned skin, they can't be seen.
The medical examiner starts the external exam on the upper body, which has 3rd and 4th degree burns. On the brow, he notices 2 bruises, one of which is purple, as well as 3 small wounds around the eyes, nose, and corner of the lips. He also observes that the nose is broken.
You often see it in head-on collisions, when someone has been punched or struck against a surface. It's always difficult to work out whether the fracture or wound is due to the fire or to violence before the death.
The medical examiner continues his work with an external examination of the neck. He looks for other injuries that could be signs of violence inflicted on the victim. He finds 4 more wounds. He then makes incisions on the wounds.
Layered musculocutaneous dissection, which is the current forensic term, involves incisions that allow us to look for deep lesions in a body that has been changed by fire. We have to determine what's underneath, so we look for hematomas, which indicate injuries prior to death.
The medical examiner finds several traces of blows.
On the body being examined, there's ecchymosis and hematomas, so lesions from when the person was alive, when blood was still circulating and could produce these phenomena.
The medical examiner continues the autopsy. In the voice box, the thyroid cartilage is fractured.
In this case, there are clearly lesions caused by manual strangulation. At that moment, so much force and pressure was exerted that the cartilage on this part broke.
The medical examiner also notices that Jean Moritz's carotid artery has been severed with a sharp object.
Obviously, a wound like this causes massive blood loss and often leads to death. Unless someone doesn't arrive within minutes, really within the first few minutes, to give the person first aid.
This injury would therefore have been the pyrotechnician's cause of death. The medical examiner must now try to determine what kind of object could have caused this fatal injury.
When it comes to the size of the wounds, it's a small weapon, or at least one with a small blade. A particularly sharp or thin screwdriver, or even a small knife or pocket knife. It's very hard to say. In any case, it's that sort of thing. But there have been changes that make it more difficult to pinpoint what type of weapon was used.
One question remains to be answered. Did Jean Moritz die before or after the fire broke out? To find out, the medical examiner inspects the bronchi and the victim's entire respiratory system.
If there's no soot or toxic gas, which are released in a fire, then we know the person was dead before the fire started, which is absolutely the case here. There are no signs of hot smoke or soot inhalation.
The perpetrator therefore started the fire after committing the murder. Jean Moritz's children are then informed about the medical examiner's findings. They discover the extent of the violence in their father's murder.
Once I found out my dad had been murdered, it's strange to say, but I felt relieved. It's weird. It would suck if he died in an accident. I mean, it sucks that he was murdered, too. It really sucks. But in a way, you think now people will listen to you. So it's reassuring in a way.
I'm so angry. I want to kill him with my bare hands. And I don't even know what would make me feel any better. I don't know. There's a hole now. There's a hole that can't be filled unless you replace it. And there's no replacing your dad.
The results of the autopsy confirm the theory of a murder covered up by a fire. And above all, they allow us to reconstruct the sequence of events. It's striking, Jean-Marc, just how determined and violent the perpetrator was.
Yes, based on the autopsy's findings, I think we can reconstruct the following scenario. It all started with a fight, during which Jean Moritz's nose was broken. Then his attacker tried to kill him by strangling him and cutting his thyroid cartilage. Then he finished him off by severing his carotid artery.
Almost as if he wanted to kill him twice.
Yes, there's a real criminal intent. The murderer is determined.
What can we deduce from this outburst of violence?
It proves, I believe, that there's a serious bone of contention, a pre-existing strained relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. No, you don't fly into such a murderous rage unless there are very serious and very significant personal reasons.
Unless the killer is unhinged.
Yes, you're right to propose this theory. But it seems the culprit knew Jean Moritz's habits and the layout of the building. He knew Jean Moritz opened his store alone in the morning, and he also knew that by locking the door, Jean Moritz couldn't escape. That isn't the behavior of someone on a murderous rampage.
Do you think that the perpetrator knew that Jesse, the victim's son, was sleeping above the store?
I'm not sure about that. Although the killer did know Jean Moritz's habits, he probably wasn't close enough with him to know the details of his private life. However, I think he knew the apartment upstairs wasn't connected to the store, so there was no risk of someone walking in.
Following the results of the autopsy, the Valenciennes Public Prosecutor's Department opens a legal investigation into first-degree murder. The Lille Police Department oversees the case. They go back to Jean Moritz's store to search for the murder weapon. At the back of the storage building, they find several sharp tools, but no traces of blood are found on these items. Did the killer bring the weapon with him? Did he use one of Jean Moritz's tools and then get rid of it? At this stage of the investigation, the police can't answer these questions. They now turn their attention to taking statements to get a handle on the victim's personality.
My dad was very sensitive and very kind and wanted to do a lot for people.
He was someone with a zest for life, who wanted to make others happy and loved having fun. He was always trying to help and encourage other people.
He liked life's simple pleasures. He didn't have time to travel abroad, but he was happy with just some good food, at a restaurant or even at home.
James Payat was Jean Moritz's best friend.
When he got the chance to party, he didn't shy away. He partied. Even after setting off fireworks and packing up all the equipment, he would say, "James, let's get a drink after."
He was a ray of sunshine. Dad really raised a lot of people's spirits.
Jean Moritz was a devoted father. He loved his 8 children born from 3 different marriages. He didn't see them every day, but he spoke about them a lot, especially to Gwendolyn, his employee.
For him, his kids were his life. He lived for his children. I mean, if one day someone had told him, "No, you can't see your kids," he would have been in a bad way. He was a great father.
To him, family was sacred. He had a tough upbringing. He didn't always get on with his brothers and sisters, and it really affected him. So for him, it was really important for my brothers and sisters to always stick together. Whatever happens, you have to stick together.
With his grandchildren, my 2 daughters, from the moment they were born, it was all presents and Grandpa Jean. He really wanted to have a monopoly on them and to make sure they had as much fun as the grown-ups. He was a doting father and grandpa.
His children were grown and he had grandchildren, but Jean Moritz never stopped being a ladies' man.
He wasn't afraid to say so himself. "I'm a womanizer." He liked to show that, despite his age, he could still take a woman and make her happy. That was Jean.
Because he was still very stylish, clean-shaven and well turned out. He was a man who took pride in his appearance.
For a long time, Jean Moritz worked as a laborer at the National Railway Company, while hosting parties whenever his schedule allowed.
And one day, at a village party, the deputy mayor asked him, "Could you get me some fireworks?" That's how he got started. It was pretty much by chance, and right away, he was hooked. For a start, because he loved it.
That's when the laborer became a pyrotechnician, a job he would do with passion until the end of his life.
He was like a little kid. When Jean was around fireworks, he turned into a kid, like a kid playing video games. Being a pyrotechnician was his hobby.
He really enjoyed seeing the wonder in people's eyes, both young and old. He gave it his all. His whole life was about the shows.
It wasn't long before Jean Moritz became a renowned pyrotechnician.
They called Jean Moritz the god of fireworks. I don't have any photos, but there are still lots of fireworks around. When it came to that, he was a champion. He was a champion.
In 2007, he decided to move in with his second wife and their 4 children in Normandy. He hoped to get new contracts in the process, but a year later, his wife asked him for a divorce.
At first, my dad took it really hard, because he was in Normandy, and he wasn't speaking a lot to his family. He felt very alone.
You could tell. He was crying a lot, not necessarily in front of me, but I knew.
Jean Moritz went back to the Nord department in northern France. A year before his death, he opened a party store in Louvroil. His son Jesse decided to live with him.
I didn't even have to think about it. I wanted to go back with him. First for the fireworks and everything, and also because I was always closer with my dad, and I didn't want to leave him alone. I wanted to be with him.
At his store, Jean Moritz also sold costumes. That's what led him to meeting a 34-year-old woman who belonged to a dance club. He was 54 at the time.
My dad called me long before everything happened to tell me he was with a younger woman. He was happy because she was a nice girl and she made him feel like a young man again.
He said to me, "Listen, you'll see. She's lovely. She's beautiful. She's young, but she's sweet. You'll see. She's a ladybug." He called her Ladybug.
To him, she was the most beautiful, sweetest thing. She was madly in love with him. Whenever he didn't hear from her, he'd tell me, "I miss her." He wondered about it.
A few months after meeting his girlfriend, Jean Moritz planned to move in with her.
My dad asked me if one day he started over with someone, would it bother me if she came to live with us? I told him it wouldn't.
He thought she was a really good person and someone he could have had a future with. His feelings for her were growing and growing.
When he died, the pyrotechnician was a happy man. His death seems impossible to explain.
Today, I still think to myself, who could have done something like that? I don't understand. Today, I'm still in a bit of a daze. I don't understand.
The first lead, followed by the investigators, devastates Jean Moritz's family. What if Jesse was involved in the murder? Present at the time of the incident, the teenager apparently heard none of the drama that was unfolding a few feet from where he had slept. But his somewhat detached attitude on the morning of the murder raised the police officer's suspicions.
When I saw Jesse come out, he came out relaxed, smoking a cigarette. It all seemed natural to him. He wasn't shocked by the firefighters or anything. I've never seen such a relaxed boy.
But according to the Moritz family's attorney, Jesse's behavior isn't shocking at all.
I see it more as a stunned and dumbfounded kid being reserved and internalizing things, rather than a lack of reaction.
He's like my dad. He's really like my dad. He won't say what's going on. Even now, he still finds it hard to express his emotions.
Something else puzzles the investigators. Jesse reacted strangely when he learned the firefighters had just found a body inside the burned-down store.
He called his mom and told her, "Dad is dead." At that moment, nobody could have known. Why would he say that Dad is dead? That's...
The investigators try to find out more about Jesse. They question his friends and family and find out that the teenager is 15 years old, somewhat difficult, and out of school. His studies became a point of contention with his father.
My father told me a few times, "I'm worried about Jesse. He won't go to school. I feel like he's not okay right now." But it was normal. It was the divorce. He missed his brothers and sisters.
We often argued because I wasn't going to class anymore. I wasn't getting up anymore. I wasn't doing anything around the house. Nothing at all. He often told me that if I carried on like that, I would achieve nothing. He said I had to change, I had to move, I had to make an effort, a lot of effort, and I shouldn't let myself go. But I didn't listen to him back then. Things happened like throwing my bed across the room, but nothing violent.
The police wonder if the father and son could have argued the day before or the morning of the murder.
At this point, it's one of the avenues that must be explored. He may be the last person to have seen his father, and he's a teenager going through teenage angst, so why not? I don't mean that's what I think. I mean the investigators were thinking, why not?
The detectives discover that Jesse has already been involved in a violent incident.
I was arrested because I got into a fight in the street with someone from my school over a disagreement about a girl. I spent the night in jail. My dad wanted me to spend the night in jail. The police asked him, and my dad insisted on me spending the night in jail. He said it would teach me a lesson.
On June 10th at 11:25 a.m., the investigators, suspecting Jesse of his father's murder, decide to take him into custody.
In their imagination, the day before, we argued, I had enough, and then the next morning, I lost it and wanted to do that to my dad. There you go. I don't know what's going on in their heads, but they have a few screws loose in any case. It's unbelievable.
For Jesse's siblings, the news of his arrest is incomprehensible.
We found out the day when all my brothers and sisters were gathered around the closed casket that Jesse couldn't be there because he was in police custody. I was lost for words. I thought it was completely crazy to arrest Jesse when we had barely started processing things.
At that moment, my brothers and I wanted to go to the police station, hit everyone, and pick up our little brother. Because it's just incredible that they can do this to a 15-year-old kid who's just gone through his dad dying while he was upstairs. They think he's guilty because he didn't hear anything. Putting a kid through that is completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous.
The detectives question Jesse about his final evening with his father.
I got home around 8 p.m. It was a quiet night. We didn't argue that night. We ate, we watched TV, and then at around midnight, I went to bed.
Jesse explains that after watching a report on the police, he went to his bedroom. His father fell asleep in his armchair. The investigators then focus on the morning of the murder. They're surprised the boy wasn't woken by the fire or the sirens.
I think I didn't hear anything because I was a heavy sleeper. It would take a lot of noise to wake me up. And sometimes that wasn't even enough.
It's detrimental for Jesse to say he was asleep, but he's not going to make something up.
But according to the plaintiff's attorney, Jesse can't physically have killed his father.
That would mean he killed him, he got dressed, he got rid of the evidence, he came back, he put his pajamas back on. That doesn't make any sense. But above all, this crime can't have been committed by a young adult, due to the victim's broken neck.
Even so, the police want to check whether the young man's body bears signs of blows or burns that could prove his involvement in the murder and the fire. Jesse is taken to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Valenciennes. A medical examiner inspects him. He finds no signs of injury. The investigators then look for new material evidence. They decide to search the home of Jesse's mother.
They wanted the things I was wearing that day, and I told the police then, in a week and a half, I'd have to wash them or get rid of them, or I can give them phony clothes.
The search turns up no incriminating evidence against the teenager. The investigators continue their interrogation. At 8 p.m., they decide to release him from custody. But before leaving the police station, Jesse is asked to hand over his sneakers.
I only had that pair. I didn't have any others. And so they took them, and they left me to walk home in the rain in my socks.
While trying to find out if an accelerant was used to start the fire, the police send Jesse's shoes to a specialist to check if the soles show traces of hydrocarbons.
Sneakers are plastic, which is like a sponge. It's everywhere, and there's fabric on them too. In my experience, if the person who started the fire was wearing those sneakers, there would be a significant quantity.
The tests carried out on the teenager's clothes and shoes ultimately reveal nothing.
For me, that door is closed because no evidence was found against this child. But the tests had to be done to be absolutely sure. I've never had any doubts about the boy. He's not cut out for the crime that was committed.
Jesse isn't capable of killing anyone. He loves nature. He loves pretty landscapes. He loves fireworks shows. No, he couldn't. He couldn't. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. He's a good guy.
Jesse was arrested on the same day his father's body was returned to the family. His older brothers were outraged by the police's lack of sensitivity. In your opinion, should the investigators have chosen a different day to arrest the teenager?
No. When you're conducting a criminal investigation, you can't walk on eggshells, especially when you're trying to identify a killer. Police custody isn't a social gathering where you ask people when they're free to set a date. No. A police investigation has a logical rhythm of its own. At this stage of the investigation, Jesse is the only suspect, so it's perfectly normal for them to arrest and question him as soon as possible.
When the police arrest Jesse, there's no material evidence to incriminate him. Their suspicions are based partly on his behavior on the morning of the murder. The witnesses who saw him coming out of the building were rather surprised by how relaxed he was.
Yes, but his behavior and his attitude can be easily explained. Jesse is a 15-year-old who is out of school, goes to bed late, and gets up around 1 or 2 p.m. He's a night owl. He was woken up suddenly, and that's why he looks dazed and unmoved by what's going on around him. But the police don't arrest him based on his attitude or his behavior. Besides, that wouldn't be legal. They take him into custody for objective reasons. Because he was there when the homicide and the fire happened. And above all, because he was there and he often argued with his father.
But isn't it a bit strange to imagine that he killed his father, then started the fire before getting back into bed, with the risk of getting trapped by the flames?
When it comes to crime, anything is possible. I've seen some murders committed in even more paradoxical situations than that. The investigators were perfectly right to question Jesse and take him into custody. They dispelled the suspicions they had of him, and in the end, he was in the clear.
The forensic experts in Lille have ascertained that the fire started at the back of the store near the victim's body, but they haven't been able to determine whether a fire accelerant was used.
Personally, I don't believe the perpetrator used a flammable liquid to start the fire. That would mean he came with a jerry can or gas canister, which would be proof of premeditation. However, we've known since the autopsy that this murder was a fight that got out of hand. I think it was after killing Jean Moritz that the murderer decided to set fire to the storage room. There were papers, costumes, and clothes that he used as fuel.
The Lille Police Department investigations continue. They look at the first reports drawn up by their colleagues in Maubeuge. They make a list of the individuals who showed up at Jean Moritz's store on the day of the murder. In particular, a man who we'll call Sergio captures their attention.
What's compelling is that he's already there when the fire brigade arrives.
It's said that often, in this type of homicide, the murderer comes back. Often, they're one of the first people on the scene.
On the morning the body is discovered, Sergio offers to identify the corpse for the police.
He said he was a good friend of Jean's. And so I looked at him like, you knew each other, but I wouldn't say you were good friends.
We found it really weird that he was getting involved like that, by offering to go look at a burned body and identify it.
It wasn't his place to identify my dad's body because he wasn't family. He had no direct connection to my dad.
Now, in any case, this person can't be accused because he was let into the crime scene. If his fingerprints are found, it makes sense. The police let him in.
Sergio is a married 49-year-old man who's having an extramarital affair with Laurence, Jean Moritz's closest female friend. The investigators learned that this young woman had a relationship with the pyrotechnician a few years earlier.
It was a beautiful love story because he was very romantic. He was a lot older than me, so he was like a father or a brother to me.
They loved each other. They met up again a while ago. It wasn't recent. It was a while ago, and they started speaking again, and they got pretty close. My dad talked to her a lot. He told her a lot of things.
It was a loving relationship, but it was an easygoing love. They weren't in a relationship, but they spent time together.
The police learned that the pyrotechnician's newfound bond with his ex-girlfriend greatly irritated Sergio.
He was convinced there was something going on between them, and that seemed to really bother him.
Yeah, he was very jealous of my dad.
Jesse tells the investigators that the weekend before the murder, during a night out at a club, the pyrotechnician angered Sergio by dancing with Laurence.
Yes, he had reasons to be jealous. But I get it in a way. I would have been the same.
That evening, Jesse was struck by how withdrawn Sergio seemed.
He was in the corner. He wasn't looking at them. He wasn't looking at us. He wasn't talking. He stayed. He looked stressed. He was tense. I'd never seen him like that.
As the testimonies unfold, the police discover that Sergio had given Jean Moritz a warning.
He told him straight, I'm warning you. If you ever get too close, I won't stand for it. I'll go very far, very far. So what does that mean? Very far. Maybe he could go even as far as murder? Why not?
On July 13th, 2011, Sergio was summoned to the police station in Maubeuge.
I was really shocked because I thought, it's pretty serious to accuse just anyone. You shouldn't accuse people falsely.
The detectives asked Sergio what he did on the day of the murder. He tells them that on June 1st at around 9:10 a.m., he went to Walna Aymare to buy plaster for a home improvement project in his bathroom. He adds that he bumped into Laurence in the store parking lot. The young woman confirms the encounter.
I said, listen, I still have some time. If you want, let's go to Bachon and have a drink at the betting shop. He said, okay, no problem.
The couple then went for a coffee.
Several people saw us. I have friends at the betting shop. The boss knows me. The woman who works there knows me too.
Laurence and Sergio parted ways at around 10 a.m. Sergio allegedly went home to finish his home improvement project. That was when he received a call from Laurence.
I called him and said, listen, apparently something serious has happened in Louvroil. I want to go and have a look. Can you meet me? I was the one who asked him to come and meet me there.
Sergio's phone records confirm he was near Awalna Aymare and Bachon between 9 and 10:15 a.m.
The phone records gave us answers. They confirmed certain times when he was a few miles from the crime scene. But that doesn't mean the suspect can't have returned to the scene. I think Bachon must be 5 minutes from Louvroil by motorbike if you ride fast. So, nothing is impossible.
But eventually, following further investigations, the detectives rule out this theory. Sergio is in the clear.
My friend could not have killed Jean. That is almost impossible. My friend isn't a madman. I don't mix with crazy people. I'm not crazy, so I'm not gonna mix with psychopaths. Get that through your skull.
For the investigators, another lead has gone nowhere. Then, a sudden testimony revives the investigation. A man shows up at the Maubert's police station after hearing about Jean Moritz's murder on the news. He's keen to tell the police about an incident he witnessed outside the pyrotechnician's store a month and a half before the murder. On April 16, 2011, at 6 in the morning, this individual saw Jean Moritz's car on fire outside his store. The witness, who prefers to stay anonymous, remembers that a driver stopped to talk to him.
He was a short North African man. Even though he was sitting down, I could tell he was short. He didn't have any particular accent. He spoke French very well. And out of nowhere, he told me, "That isn't arson. It's most likely a mechanical problem, because the flames are coming from the front, from the engine hood."
No sooner had the driver made this mysterious comment than he took off again in his dark-colored vehicle.
I thought it wasn't the way a normal person reacts to danger. I thought it was very sketchy behavior.
After finding out about Jean Moritz's murder, the witness immediately thought the car fire was due to arson.
I realized the car fire might have been an act of revenge, or at least a warning, saying, "We set fire to your car, but next time we might come after you."
Since the car wasn't running, the keys weren't in it. The ignition hadn't been switched on, and the car had been parked for over 3 hours. It's unlikely the fire was an accident.
The claims adjuster sent by the insurance company was unable to establish the cause of the fire. The arson theory, therefore, hasn't been proven. According to Laurence, Jean Moritz's closest female friend, this incident should have alerted the pyrotechnician.
I thought, you might have to watch out because, in my opinion, the car didn't catch fire by itself. It also seemed strange to him. How can a car magically catch fire by itself in the early hours of the morning?
You have to wonder if someone set the car on fire, which would be very disturbing, given that a month and a half later, Jean Moritz's store caught fire, and this time, Jean Moritz was inside.
The police also discovered that during a firework display he put on 3 weeks before his death, Jean Moritz received some very threatening phone calls.
He just said to me, "No, this can't be. He's doing it again. I'm starting to get sick of this. This won't do." And I could see he was really bothered. I asked him if he was okay. I said, "All good, Jean?" He said, "Yes, don't worry, it's fine." But he was worried. He kept looking around, as if someone was going to come there and beat him up. In the end, he didn't have time to tell me what had happened that day.
James Payat tells the investigators that this wasn't the first time Jean Moritz had received threatening calls. He recalls another incident.
He was really on edge, and you could clearly hear him saying, "Come on down. There's no problem. If you're planning on pestering me like this with your calls, I'm not afraid. Come here. I'm in Trélon. Come on down." He knew full well that the person who had threatened him could show up, and that's why he asked 2 of my brothers-in-law to step in case there were a few of them.
The person who made these calls has never been identified. The witness statements all agree. The victim was being threatened and was starting to get scared. The investigators learned that a week before his death, the pyrotechnician had a security system installed at his home.
He didn't get just any local electrician. He called a national company because he felt he was in danger. He asked this company to come and install a conventional alarm but with buttons to trigger it.
It's called a panic button. It lets storekeepers, if they're under threat, call the emergency services without being seen by the assailant.
I found that very weird. I wondered about it, and I thought maybe there was something wrong, because before that, he was someone who wasn't worried or scared of anything.
The pyrotechnician's behavior gradually changed.
He still joked around, but it wasn't like before. He didn't let on that he was scared of anything. But I felt like he wasn't the same, and I got the impression he was worried.
Unfortunately, Jean Moritz never told his loved ones what was worrying him.
It's obvious that if my dad had been threatened, he never would have let on. If he had talked about it, to us, his children anyway, we would have been worried and angry, and it would have put us in a bind. So what he wanted above all was to protect us.
The detectives from the Lille police force think that there could be a connection between the fire that burned Jean Moritz's car in April 2011 and his murder. They believe the incident marked the start of a series of threats and warnings against the pyrotechnician.
It's very tempting to link the car fire to the one at the store. In other words, to the murder. Arson isn't something trivial, ordinary, or insignificant. The only problem is it was never formally established that the car fire was arson. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but even so, it would be of great interest to identify and question the man who made the strange comments in front of the burning car.
Statements from Jean Moritz's personal and professional circle revealed the pyrotechnician was worried in the weeks prior to his death. But he never told his loved ones that he was being threatened or who the instigator could be.
Jean Moritz wouldn't let himself be pushed around. Jean Moritz wasn't someone who was easily intimidated. So if he put an alarm in his store, it was because he had real fears. He didn't share his fears with his loved ones, probably because he wanted to shield part of his life. By revealing the origin or nature of the threats or harassment against him, he would have been forced to share that secret.
For that matter, it's not impossible that some of his secrets were on his computer or his cell phone. Remember, both of these objects disappeared on the day of the murder.
Yes, the killer must have taken them with him, thinking that these items could contain traces or proof of the harassment or threats he was making against Jean Moritz. And this evidence could lead the police to him.
Jean Moritz's children then bring a new piece of evidence to the police's attention. When they logged into their father's Facebook profile, they saw the following message: "Leave people who are in a relationship alone, and a word of advice, this is no joke." This threatening message was sent on April 23, 2011, 5 weeks before the murder. The police start digging into the victim's love life. A few months before the murder, Jean Moritz received a strange visit. Gwendolyn, the pyrotechnician's employee, remembers that on that day, Jean Moritz asked her not to be present for the conversation. When the mysterious visitor left, Jean Moritz seemed very downcast.
Jean told me that was my girlfriend's husband. He came to see me because he saw the messages and he knew we were seeing each other.
The person even said to him, "What are we going to do now that we love the same woman?" while crying.
That day, Jean Moritz found out that the woman he was planning his future with was in fact still very close to her ex-husband.
After the conversation, Jean was totally bowled over. He wondered why she hadn't told him. She had never told him there was another man.
He didn't know she'd been married. He didn't know all that. It broke his heart when he found out.
To learn more about this love triangle, the investigators bring in the young woman, who we'll call Natalie, for questioning on June 8, 2011.
My dad's girlfriend says she isn't with her partner anymore, but he comes over 3 days a week to see their kids. She makes it clear that he sleeps on the sofa.
Natalie tells the investigators about her unambiguous relationship with her ex-husband, based on the well-being of their 4 children. Questioned about her relationship with Jean Moritz, she says they were just friends.
I found out my dad's girlfriend lied to the police because she said she just had a professional relationship with my dad. It wasn't romantic, and she had never slept with him. I was really surprised.
According to the victim's family and friends, Natalie had always tried to hide her relationship with Jean Moritz.
When I or someone else was there, she wouldn't hug Jean. She wouldn't kiss him. Once I saw them kissing goodbye. But otherwise, she'd act like she wasn't with him.
When I saw how she wasn't making it public, I thought maybe she didn't have strong feelings for him. She was acting like they were just friends, and he would have preferred her to be more attached. So I thought maybe something shady was going on.
I thought if she was doing that, it was to hide her relationship with John so people wouldn't find out and tell her partner.
On June 30th, 2011, the investigators call in the young woman's ex-husband, who will call Ahmed for questioning. The 39-year-old man is from Morocco. He lives in Belgium, but every week he visits his ex-wife, from whom he separated 10 years ago, to see his children. He doesn't have a stable career and makes a living from odd jobs. From the start of his police interview, Ahmed introduces himself as Jean Moritz's friend.
My dad told me about this woman's ex-husband and said he wanted to get her back, but he never said they were friends. Far from it. He never hung out with them. They never went for a drink together. Not at all. They weren't friends at all. I must have seen him once, maybe twice, but that's all.
The detectives question Ahmed about the nature of Natalie and Jean Moritz's relationship. Unlike his ex-wife, he acknowledges that it was a romantic relationship.
According to him, he doesn't have a problem with the relationship between Jean Moritz and this woman he's divorced from, but has 4 children with. He visits them 3 times a week, but apart from that, he no longer has a romantic relationship with this woman.
The police have doubts about this man's statement. They know the couple's youngest child is 6 years old. He was therefore conceived after they separated.
There's nothing but lies in the statements, both from the wife and from him. There's not a shred of truth.
The investigators then take various witness statements about Ahmed's jealousy.
This man can't accept the idea of her moving on. This man doesn't want Jean Moritz in his ex-wife's life.
The woman told Jean, "Be careful. He's violent." Because apparently he had already hit his wife.
Ahmed's interview comes to an end. The police ask the Belgian authorities to send them a copy of his criminal record.
We find out that this man is known to the Belgian police and justice system. He already has a record, and he's been tried for acts of violence. I believe he has other crimes under his belt, but not in connection with our case.
The detectives decide to follow his lead. On October 4, 2011, at 6:45 a.m., they go to Natalie's home to carry out a search. The officers find nothing of interest, but they decide to take her and her 14-year-old son to the police station in Maubeuge. The teenager has been identified as the person who sent the threatening Facebook message. He's immediately taken into police custody. Very quickly, he admits to having sent the message of his own volition, because he didn't want his mother to move on. While the interviews of Natalie and her son began earlier in the morning, Ahmed shows up at the police station at 1 p.m. The police decide to take him into custody too.
There are, if you will, police techniques to provoke reactions. In other words, the investigators don't necessarily expect much from the teenager, but they can expect the parents to react when they learn that their son is in the next room. It's an interrogation technique to throw people off balance. It's deeply underhanded, But it's part of the police's responsibility to get results.
The teenager is interrogated for hours. In a neighboring room, his mother, also being questioned, isn't very talkative.
This woman, I think, is in serious danger. She doesn't know what she's allowed to say. She's afraid for herself and her family. Right now, there's a web of lies. So the police push her, and she ends up going into her relationship with Jean Moritz and admitting they were a real couple.
The investigators wonder whether Natalie is being pressured by her ex-husband.
At this police station, at this moment, a family scheme is playing out, or maybe being foiled. No one knows where the lies end. No one knows the extent of the solidarity between the former couple. They just know that this woman isn't free to speak and is afraid of her ex-husband.
Could Ahmed have killed Jean Moritz out of jealousy? For the detectives, the man has motive.
This man is extremely possessive, extremely jealous, and extremely violent.
For love, you can do lots and lots of stupid things. Men go completely crazy over women. Women go completely crazy over men. It's clear that a bitter man who wants to get his wife back will do whatever it takes to get rid of a person who stole her heart. That's normal, but not to this extent.
The police ask Ahmed to account for his whereabouts on the morning of the murder. The man explains that he went to a friend's house at 10 a.m. to do some work. As his friend wasn't there, he got a coffee while he waited for him. Then, at around noon, he said he went to have lunch at his ex-wife's house. The police summoned his friend. The latter confirms his statement, except for a few details.
There are a few discrepancies in each of their statements. Their statements don't exactly match.
For the victim's son, this alibi was verified too quickly.
You can see their story is all over the place. You get the feeling there's something going on. But the police didn't look any further into this alibi. It's as if I just said I couldn't have done it because I was with someone else. And, well, okay, let's stop there.
It's an alibi that's hard to confirm. But at the same time, the police don't have any evidence against this man. They don't have anything on him.
The police release Ahmed and his son from custody. Natalie also leaves the station at the end of the day. But the detectives decide to continue following this lead by tapping their phones. And in August, they overhear a suspicious conversation between Natalie and her eldest son. In this conversation, the young woman seems to accuse her ex-husband.
She says, I don't care anyway, he's going to end up in prison.
On December 14th, 2011, the police take the young woman into custody.
The police questioned her about it. She said she knew her phone was tapped and it had nothing to do with my dad. And clearly, in the end, the police didn't try to find out any more than that.
No incriminating evidence has been found against the young woman or her jealous ex-husband.
Of course, he is now presumed innocent, like all the other suspects in Jean Moritz's murder. The lawyer in me is obviously committed to the principle of innocent until proven guilty. But he is also part of a growing list of suspects which is making the investigation extremely difficult. Because this crime could have been committed by so many people.
Before we talk about the jealous ex-husband, let's discuss the method used by the police to interrogate the three witnesses. Do you think it was normal for them to take a 14-year-old into custody despite having practically nothing on him just to unnerve his parents?
When police officers decide to take someone into custody, they don't ask themselves if it's normal. They ask themselves if it's legal and if it's useful. Well, yes, it's legal to take a 14-year-old into custody. And in this case, it's useful because the teenager sent a threatening message on Facebook. The investigators can then confront the witnesses about their improbabilities, their estimations, their contradictions, and their lies. Police custody is a kind of play that's performed behind closed doors by two characters who engage in a psychological tug-of-war. In the end, the hope is that all or part of the truth will come out. Of course, legitimate psychological pressures are exerted. Playing on family relationships is one of them, and it's often very effective.
So the investigation showed that Ahmed knew Natalie was in a relationship with Jean Moritz. He was a jealous man, and he had been convicted in Belgium for intentional acts of violence. In addition, his alibi for the morning of the murder seems relatively precarious. According to Jean Moritz's family, the police didn't look deep enough into this lead.
A credible motive, a plausible motive, doesn't make a man a murderer. The checks carried out by the investigators couldn't establish that Ahmed had made threats against the pyrotechnician. A witness reports seeing Ahmed visiting the victim a few months before the murder. But far from acting violently or aggressively, Ahmed left in tears.
Tapping Natalie's phone led to the investigators overhearing a conversation she had with her eldest son, during which she made a dubious remark. "I don't care anyway, he's going to end up in prison." How do you interpret this statement?
Let's be clear. That sentence isn't proof of Ahmed's guilt. Natalie said it during a conversation with her son, and there's no mention in this conversation of Jean Moritz's murder. I think when she said those words, she was alluding to her ex-husband's criminal record.
With no material proof to back up the romantic lead, the investigators turned to the pyrotechnician's financial situation. They discovered that Jean Moritz was in debt and wasn't paying his rent. So the police decide to question the owner of the property where the pyrotechnician's store was based. Jean Moritz's landlord is summoned by the Maubert police station on July 19th. Very quickly, he confirms to the police that the pyrotechnician regularly missed his rental payments.
Jan was a bad payer. He paid in drips and dabs, and in my opinion, he paid as he made the money.
My father was more or less always in debt. In this profession, the craftspeople are self-employed. They invest a lot of money, and they earn very little.
At the time of his death, Jean Moritz hadn't paid any rent for 4 months. He owed his landlord just over 10,000 euros, but kept promising to resolve the situation.
Don't worry, Giovanni. I'll do it. After July 14th, everything will be paid, because I have over 50 purchase orders. He showed me a stack of orders from various town halls that had ordered fireworks.
The investigators learned that the pyrotechnician owed an additional debt to his landlord.
When my dad opened his store, there was a serious investment to make. His landlord is pretty well off and gave him an advance of 30,000 euros to invest in the store.
This loan is certainly thought-provoking because it's a significant loan. So, what makes it significant? Not the lessor's assets, but Mr. Moritz's ability to repay it. It comes as a surprise, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily make the landlord one of the suspects.
To get the loan, Jean Moritz signed an IOU in front of a notary with a very important clause.
He had to put me on his life insurance policy, so in case something happened, I would get the 30,000 euros back. But unfortunately, I never saw a copy of that contract.
It seems that once again, Jean Moritz hadn't kept his word. And as with his rent, the investigators found that the pyrotechnician was struggling to repay the installments of the 30,000 euro loan.
I had a series of checks, about 6 of them. All 6 bounced. I took them to the bank 2 or 3 times. Every time they bounced. He wasn't worried about it at all. He didn't care. He was a laid-back guy.
The police see that the money had become a point of contention between both men.
I know there was a time when he came to the store. They went upstairs and had an argument, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I could hear them speaking loudly, but I couldn't understand what they were saying.
The detectives asked the landlord where he was on the morning of the murder.
On June 1st, 2011, I called him to say, Jan, I've had enough. I'm cashing your checks. And then when I was on my way to the bank, I got a call telling me smoke was coming from one of my properties.
Giovanni Tonelli then tried to contact the pyrotechnician again.
I called him, but nobody answered the phone. So I left a message on his cell.
Analysis of Giovanni Tonelli's phone records confirm his statement. The signals from his cell phone show he couldn't have been at the crime scene. That's when the victim's eldest son tells the police about a strange conversation his brother allegedly had with Giovanni Tonelli a week after the murder.
The landlord said, I spoke to my accountant about it. He said this to my brother. And my accountant told me, you shouldn't get worked up about something like this. Start a fire and that's the end of it. It's harsh, a week after my dad's murder, for the landlord to tell my brother something his accountant had said that was so crude and severe. I couldn't believe my ears.
But the investigation hasn't turned up any incriminating evidence against Giovanni Tonelli. Following his interview, Jean Moritz's landlord is therefore released from the police station.
My conscience was clear. I had nothing to fear. I wasn't the one who did it.
The investigators continue to go through Jean Moritz's bank accounts. They still think the murder could be linked to his financial troubles. The police look into the victim's professional relationships. That's how they discover the cutthroat and competitive world of pyrotechnicians.
The Criminal Investigation Department is called in to look at the competitor angle, because firework displays can involve tens of thousands of euros in sales. Some pyrotechnicians have a reputation for getting violent and not letting anyone stand in their way, since it's a world of red-blooded men.
Bernard Diome, president of the Show and Entertainment Pyrotechnics Association, confirms how tough the pyrotechnic business is.
With fireworks, the less you say, the better. The key word is silence. Everyone does their own thing, and may the most dishonest person win. Because up to 90% of people who sell fireworks are unregulated. They fight tooth and nail to keep the fruits of their labors, because every year there are newcomers. They want their share.
Christophe Desgroot worked with Jean Moritz for several years.
You have to fight for the fireworks shows, especially now. And on my heels, there are what I call rats, because some people in this business are out to get all the contracts. Yes, I think they could kill someone over it.
The investigators researched Jean Moritz's activities and reputation since his return to Nord.
When Jean moved back here, he told me, look, I've got back 3/4 of the fireworks shows I lost. He even told me a couple of people are going to be mad. Jean was truly a fierce competitor. I think even the huge firework companies around here were scared of him.
My dad had a reputation when it came to fireworks, especially in Avenois, as someone who was successful and would continue to be successful. He always had a better offer. People, officials, the public always told us every year that the fireworks were more and more beautiful.
Jean Moritz wanted to attract potential clients at any cost.
Jean Moritz's working methods were old school. Sometimes a handshake was enough to make an agreement. He wasn't always financially secure, and he sometimes accepted contracts or deals at much lower rates than some of his competitors. So that annoyed some people.
I remember my dad wrote on his bids, free sound system. His competitors can't do that. They aren't former sound engineers. They have to call an audio equipment hire service, and that's going to cost extra. So by itself, when there's 1,000 euros worth of sound for a firework display, that's an extra cost of 1,000 euros.
He always put in more. He always had more equipment, and he was always adding more. Even if the towns didn't have very big budgets, he would add a little of what he had left in stock to create something that looked good and not necessarily at a cost.
The pyrotechnician's commercial practices seem to have irritated many of his rivals.
A lot of people were against John. They criticized him. Your prices are too low. We can't allow that.
There was one in particular who was really nasty, who called the town halls to tell them that John was a bad pyrotechnician and everything else. Sometimes he would even come to the launch sites to pester John.
This person went straight onto the field, the launch site, and started disconnecting some of the fireworks wires.
I know it came to blows between him and my dad. My dad wasn't a fighter, once again, so things must have got really heated. So yeah, he did, in any case, have an enemy among his competitors in Avignon.
The police learned from Jean Moritz's sons that this individual's behavior was particularly insensitive the day after the murder.
It should be noted that my dad's main rival, the day after his murder, went to several town halls, knocked on the doors, and said, "Moritz is dead. I'm offering my services."
On February 14, 2012, this individual is summoned to Maubeuge police station. But after taking his statement, the police are convinced this pyrotechnician can't have been involved in Jean Moritz's murder because he has a solid alibi. The professional lead hasn't been completely ruled out, but today, none of Jean Moritz's competitors are suspects. According to Bernard Diome, the pyrotechnician's war over contracts can't be a motive for murder.
Without a doubt, he can breed hate. People will report you to the public administration, send Social Security after you, or tell your clients nonsense behind your back. If you have thick skin, it will be fine. If you're hot under the collar, you pay the guy a visit and threaten him with the worst. But to go from that to murder, I just don't believe it.
The investigation into Jean Moritz's murder has thrown us into the little-known professional environment of pyrotechnicians. It seems that this extremely competitive industry creates extremely tense relationships between different professionals. Do you think these intense rivalries could be behind the murder?
We're certainly dealing with small, often precarious businesses, which share a very limited and very specialist market. I can easily imagine the anger of someone who has had a contract stolen, when this contract could be important or even crucial for their business's survival. It's a no-holds-barred environment, but this is not the world of organized crime or drugs, where business conflicts are solved with Kalashnikovs.
Even so, the Lille Police Department have discovered that Jean Moritz alienated himself from some professionals by systematically slashing his prices. He made a number of enemies, going so far as to fighting one.
That's true. The murder took place a month and a half before Bastille Day, when pyrotechnicians can expect to finalize contracts and generate a significant proportion of their income. This coincidence could suggest that one of Jean Moritz's rivals, incensed by his practices, came over to give him a piece of his mind. The conversation may have turned sour and led to a fight which ended in murder.
To be clear, Jean-Marc, the investigation didn't prove that the firework display contract signed by Jean Moritz ended up going to one of his competitors.
Right. The police were therefore unable to answer the famous question, who benefited from the murder? This case has every possible motive for murder: money, hate, jealousy, and love. The different leads followed by the Lille police are all relevant, but for now, there's no conclusive evidence to support one over another.
We think the killer's name is in the case file. It's believed that he's a man, equipped with some strength and power, intelligent and clearly with enough experience already to stay calm when faced with a pool of blood and a man with a slit throat.
Ever since the murder, Jean Moritz's family and friends have continued following the investigation's progress.
For me, it's important for the murderer to be found because I think whoever did it is living a good life right now, even though he's torn a family apart.
For Jean Moritz's children, their pain is still raw.
I miss him terribly. All my brothers and sisters miss him terribly. I don't think you can grieve properly when it's murder.
Basically, I'm not okay. You know? I think about everything we won't get to do, everything he won't get to see. When it comes to me, he'll never get to see my children or anything. So I think about that, and it hurts. But there's nothing you can do.
I'm angry. I'm angry all the time. Whenever somebody talks about my dad or someone talks about their dad, I feel it. I'm like, my dad was murdered. My dad was murdered. I'm Danny. My dad was murdered.
Jean Moritz had 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls, who today are united by their desire to know the murderer's identity.
I can't mourn, that's for sure. Maybe on the day of an eventual trial, maybe. Seeing my little sisters growing up without their father, seeing their texts and messages, seeing their suffering, that's my grief. As long as my little sisters are unhappy, and they'll be unhappy for a long time to come, I can't mourn.
Jean Moritz's murder occurred in June 2011, so it isn't what we would call a cold case, meaning a very cold case with less and less chance of being solved as the years go by. Since the start, Jean Moritz's children, with their attorney's support, have fulfilled their roles by constantly asking the examining magistrates for new investigative measures. However, despite the Lille Police Department's efforts, the investigation is at a standstill. Today, the family fears that the case will be dismissed and the authorities will stop trying to find the culprit. Good night.